The wind howls across the barren plains, and a lone rider collapses in front of a modest, weather-worn clinic. Dr. James Alcott rushes outside, heart pounding, to rescue the blood-soaked stranger before he fades into death. Little does the frontier doctor realize that the man he's about to save is none other than the most notorious outlaw in the West, an outlaw whose very name strikes terror in every lawman's heart. Amid the rattling shutters and dusty streets of Ironwood Gulch, this fateful act of mercy will unravel friendships, test loyalties, and cast a long, foreboding shadow over the entire town. Ironwood Gulch was not even a speck on most travelers' maps, but it was home to Dr. James Alcott, the only physician for 50 miles around. A tall, lanky man in his mid-30s, he had studied medicine at a makeshift medical academy back east, a place overshadowed by more famous institutions like Harvard Medical School. Yet what Dr. Alcott lacked in prestigious credentials he made up for with ingenuity, compassion, and grit. He arrived in Ironwood Gulch 2 years earlier, lured by the promise of cheap land and a desperate need for a skilled healer in an unforgiving environment. The town itself was a tapestry of hardships and dreams. A single dusty main road connected the saloon, the general store, a struggling blacksmith's forge, and the humble wooden church with its slanting steeple. Small ranches and farms dotted the outskirts. Most days began early with ranchers and merchants hustling to eke out a living. Occasionally, the peace would be interrupted by the arrival of a stagecoach or a wandering prospector hoping to strike it rich in the arid hills. When trouble brewed, it typically manifested as barroom brawls, unpaid debts, and scuffles with horse thieves. Not long after settling, Dr. Alcott had seen everything from cholera outbreaks to arrow wounds. Gunshot injuries were uncommon, but not unheard of. He was quickly respected, for he asked no questions about a patient's background and charged only what his neighbors could afford. Even the surly bartender at the Broken Saddle Saloon, Big Ed Murphy, had come to trust the doctor's steady hand after a jagged shard of broken glass severed Ed's palm. Late that afternoon, the day before the wounded stranger arrived, Dr. Alcott was meticulously restocking his medical supplies: laudanum for pain, carbolic acid, for disinfecting strips of bandages he ordered monthly from the East Coast, and a precious few scalpels he kept sharp with a whetstone. He was also expecting a crate of fresh textbooks from Dr. Henry F. Hoyt, a notable surgeon in New York, who occasionally corresponded with Alcott about frontier medical practices. Eager to improve his craft, Alcott looked forward to gleaning new techniques from the medical texts, certain that knowledge was the only real armor against the near-daily emergencies he faced. Outside, the sun hovered low, turning the sky shades of crimson and gold. A slight breeze teased the tumbleweeds. At times like this, Alcott liked to pour himself a cup of coffee stand on his porch and pretend he was back east for a moment, if only to calm the restlessness that had crept into his heart. The frontier tested every soul from the devout preacher to the hardened outlaw. And though Alcott had never considered himself a man of violence, he knew the West could warp anyone's fate in a single heartbeat. As he stood there that day, sipping his lukewarm coffee, he couldn't help but think about the stories drifting in from other towns. Rumors of ruthless bandits, stagecoach robberies, and entire ranches burned to cinders. The talk circled around one name in particular, a name Alcott had heard only once in hushed tones at the saloon. Some said he was more legend than man, a ghost who came and went, leaving carnage in his wake. Little did Alcott know that by sunrise the next day, this very legend would be lying on his operating table, fighting for his life. A few hours before dawn, Dr. Alcott was jolted awake by frantic pounding on his door. He leapt from his bed, pulled on his trousers, and grabbed a lantern. Outside, the darkness pressed in, illuminated only by lantern light and the eerie glow of a full moon. At the threshold stood Jeremiah Wilcox, a ranch hand with sweat beading on his brow despite the chill in the air. "Doc, there's a fella he's hurt real bad." Jeremiah blurted out, his voice trembling. "He collapsed near the hitching post in front of your clinic. I don't even know if he's still breathing." Without another word, Dr. Alcott darted out into the night. It was times like these he'd come to both dread and expect in Ironwood Gulch, a crisis more often than not arriving in the dead of night. He found the stranger crumpled in the dust, his shirt soaked with blood. A horse with a deep chestnut coat stood nervously nearby, its reins dangling as though its rider had slid off and not climbed back on. Kneeling beside the wounded man, Alcott pressed 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse was faint. His breathing was shallow. "Help me get him inside," Alcott ordered. Jeremiah took one arm, Alcott the other, and together they half lifted, half dragged the stranger into the small 2-room clinic. Under the flickering lantern light, the extent of the stranger's wounds came into dreadful clarity. A bullet wound in the side dangerously close to vital organs, and a gash along his ribs. Blood had seeped into his clothes, caking them to his skin. Dr. Alcott tore open the man's shirt and muttered, "Good Lord." It was worse than he had hoped, but not beyond his skill. He drew a deep breath. "Jeremiah, bring me hot water and keep an eye on my supplies. I'll need you to help me if I call." For a moment, Jeremiah hesitated, his hand shaking. As a ranch hand, he had no stomach for human blood, but Alcott's measured tone gave him some courage. He nodded and hurried to the back room where water and bandages were stored. Dr. Alcott stripped his sleeves above his elbows, poured carbolic acid into a basin to sterilize his instruments, and began an urgent examination. With nimble fingers, he prodded the wound, searching for the bullet. The stranger moaned, flinching in pain. At once, Alcott gave him a measure of laudanum. Painkillers were scarce, but this was a dire case. Time inched forward like molasses. Outside, the moonlight gave way to the pale edges of dawn. Alcott located the bullet, lodged in the man's flesh, but extracting it was delicate work. Any miscalculation could puncture something vital. Sweat trickled down the doctor's brow as he navigated the metal forceps deeper into the wound. Finally, the bullet clinked into a small tin dish. Alcott exhaled in relief. The first battle was won. Once the bullet was out, he cleaned and stitched the lacerations. The man's condition was grave, but not hopeless. His heartbeat grew more stable, although each breath remained labored. Exhausted. Alcott stepped back. Jeremiah hovered in the doorway, eyes wide. "Will he live?" he asked quietly. "I've done all I can for now," Alcott said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Let him rest. We'll see if he pulls through. Keep this between us for the moment. I don't want the whole town stirring until the man can at least say who he is." Jeremiah nodded, and as the first rays of dawn flooded through the window, Dr. Alcott felt a pang of foreboding. He'd saved many lives before, but never in such dire secrecy. Something about this stranger felt heavy, like a burden placed on his shoulders. Little did he know it was the weight of a man wanted in every territory, from Texas to Wyoming. Morning light found Ironwood Gulch rousing. For the day the blacksmith stoked his forge, the general store owner dusted her shelves, and Big Ed Murphy threw open the saloon doors for the earliest of whiskey-seeking patrons. Only Jeremiah Dr. Alcott and the unconscious stranger knew anything of the blood-soaked drama that had played out in the dead of night. Inside the clinic, Alcott hovered over his patient, checking his stitches, monitoring his temperature, and occasionally forcing small sips of water down his throat. The man's face was shadowed by a layer of stubble, his hair matted with dried sweat. Alcott guessed he was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. A dangerous age in more ways than one. Curiosity gnawed at the doctor. He had removed the stranger's vest and dust-caked shirt, setting them aside for potential clues. Poring over them, he noticed a small embroidered initial on the inside seam of the vest, a single letter R. The design was ornate, perhaps the work of a fancy tailor in a bigger city. This man had money at some point, or had stolen a vest from someone who did. Alcott also discovered a battered pocket watch tucked in a hidden lining. It was the kind one might inherit, or loot tarnished silver, with a name etched on the inside cover, Jackson Mackenzie. Could that be his name, or another victim of a theft? Then again, Mackenzie might match the R if the man's first name started with R. The possible combination teased Alcott's mind. He recalled how weeks ago, a Pinkerton detective passing through had mentioned an outlaw named Red Jack Mackenzie, rumored to be behind countless robberies and murders. Red Jack was described as cunning and callous, with a bounty that soared higher each time he struck. The Pinkerton man had warned folks to stay vigilant. This outlaw might come through anywhere, and he left no eyewitnesses alive. Could this battered stranger lying helpless in the clinic be the legendary Red Jack? The notion was so chilling, Alcott initially dismissed it. He looked again at the watch. The bullet wound the battered body. If the rumors held any truth, Red Jack was unstoppable, a force of pure evil. But the man before him was mortal flesh, vulnerable, and reliant on the doctor's mercies. The contradiction unsettled him. Should Red Jack have bled so profusely if he was that unstoppable, and would such a feared figure travel alone, or was his gang lurking somewhere nearby? Dr. Alcott's mind spun with questions. He stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The sun was full overhead, and the pungent smell of manure and hot earth greeted him. Jeremiah was finishing up at the hitching post, making sure the stranger's horse, too skittish for anyone else to ride, had water and feed. Alcott strode over. "How's the horse?" he asked. Jeremiah shook his head. "He's jumpy, Doc. Ain't used to me, that's for sure. Looks like a hardy breed, though. Not a common ranch horse." Alcott nodded, pressing his lips together. The idea that this man might be the infamous Red Jack Mackenzie refused to leave him. "Do me a favor. Jeremiah, don't mention any of this. If folks find out we're harboring a dangerous outlaw, if that's who he is, we could have a full-scale panic on our hands." Jeremiah swallowed hard. "I understand, Doc. But if the sheriff rides into town for any reason—" "Well, I know," Alcott said, "but the man hasn't even opened his eyes yet. Let's gather facts before we sound alarms." He returned to the clinic, shutting the door behind him. The unconscious stranger stirred ever so slightly, as though locked in a fevered dream. Alcott wondered if it was possible that behind those closed lids lay the ruthless mind of the West's most wanted. If so, how would the man react once he realized he was powerless, dependent on the very kindness he'd spent years violating? The day stretched long. Between refilling bandages, checking pulses, and ensuring the patient didn't slip further into shock, Dr. Alcott wrestled with a storm of apprehension. For all his medical skill, he suddenly found himself at the mercy of fate itself. One bullet had turned his life upside down, possibly bringing him face to face with a monster. And if it truly was, Red Jack Mackenzie Alcott feared the repercussions that would follow lawmen, bounty hunters, maybe even the Outlaw's own gang. One life had been saved, but the safety of the entire town now hung on the razor's edge of a mystery. By the second night, the stranger's fever broke. Around midnight, Dr. Alcott dozed in a chair beside him, a medical journal on his lap, half read under the lantern's dim light. A low groan stirred him awake. He snapped his eyes open to see the stranger moving his head from side to side as though in a delirious haze. "Easy there," Alcott murmured, leaning forward. "You're safe here." A pair of weary blue eyes, clouded by pain, blinked open. The man tried to speak, but his throat was parched. Alcott poured a trickle of water into a tin cup, gently placing it against the man's cracked lips. He drank, coughing a little. Where am I?" the man rasped. His voice was coarse, like boots scraping desert gravel. "You're in Ironwood Gulch," Alcott replied calmly. "I'm Dr. James Alcott. You were found outside my clinic badly wounded. I removed a bullet from your side. You're lucky to be alive." The stranger's brow furrowed as he tried to piece things together. "Ironwood Gulch," he repeated. "How many days?" "You've been unconscious for close to 2 days," Alcott said, setting the cup aside. "I need to ask your name." Silence stretched. The man's eyes flickered with something that could be fear, suspicion, or cunning. Alcott braced for an evasive answer. But then, in a raw whisper, the man said, "Call me Jack." Alcott studied him. "Jack. Well, Jack, your bullet wound is healing, but you need rest. Is there anyone I can contact? Family, friends?" "None." Jack answered, coughing again. He shut his eyes as if to block out the question entirely. When he opened them again, he looked at Alcott with an intensity that made the doctor's stomach tighten. "What do you want from me?" The question was loaded with distrust, as though the man expected blackmail or a bounty claim at any moment. Alcott's voice was gentle. "I'm a doctor. I only want to see my patients recover." Jack closed his eyes in apparent relief or exhaustion, maybe both. Alcott hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I found a pocket watch in your vest. It says, Jackson Mackenzie. If that's your name, you should know people around these parts have heard of a certain Red Jack Mackenzie. Is that you?" For a moment, Jack did not move. Then his eyes slowly opened, and a bitter half-smile formed on his lips. "What if it is?" The confirmation landed like a thunderclap in Alcott's chest. He had known it, suspected it, but hearing it said aloud was something else. Red Jack Mackenzie, the most feared outlaw in the West, lay on his clinic bed, helpless, recovering from a life-threatening wound that Alcott had worked tirelessly to mend. "You could fetch quite a bounty," Jack said quietly, his gaze never leaving the doctor's face. "Enough to buy this entire town 10 times over." "So why haven't you turned me in?" Alcott didn't answer at first. Then he steeled himself. "I'm a doctor," he repeated, a slight tremor in his voice. "I took an oath to heal, not to profit from violence." In truth, he felt every nerve in his body bristling with the realization that he was harboring a fugitive. But a deeper instinct, the same that had driven him to the frontier to help the needy, held him to his moral ground. And you're not well enough to be taken anywhere. Red Jack shifted, wincing in pain. I've never known a doctor who wouldn't hand me over for gold, he muttered, his voice heavy with cynicism. Alcott rose to his feet, turning down the wick of the lantern. Well, maybe you've never met one who truly cares more about saving lives than collecting coin. But hear me. If the sheriff or bounty hunters get wind of you, I can't protect you from the consequences of what you've done. Jack closed his eyes, saying nothing. Alcott pulled a thin blanket over him and moved to leave. He paused at the threshold, glancing back at the infamous outlaw, who only a week ago he would have dreaded meeting on the open road. Now he was his patient, a man caught between life and death, no matter his crimes. Dr. Alcott stepped out, locking the door behind him, as if he could lock away his own growing dread. Outside, the desert wind sighed against the wooden walls, whispering secrets of a West that was as lawless as it was vast. And so it was settled. Red Jack Mackenzie was indeed under his roof, and neither man could predict the chaos that would soon erupt from this tenuous arrangement. Over the next 2 days, the tension inside the clinic could have been cut with a scalpel. Red Jack Mackenzie's strength ebbed and flowed as he battled infection and the residual pain from the gunshot. Dr. Alcott dutifully treated him, changing dressings, administering laudanum sparingly and monitoring his fever. All the while, an unseen threat loomed. What if the law came knocking? What if the outlaws' gang, known for their brazen rescues, arrived, looking for their leader? Ironwood Gulch was poorly defended, its solitary sheriff rarely present, and its townspeople blissfully unaware of the threat that was quite literally behind locked doors. Jeremiah Wilcox was the only other person in the know. Each time he brought fresh water or supplies, he eyed Jack's lean, sinewy arms and the dark glint in the outlaw's eyes. The rumor mill was bound to explode if word leaked out that Red Jack was in Dr. Alcott's clinic. For now, though, Jeremiah kept his promise, though not without a layer of palpable fear. Late one afternoon, Alcott was carefully redressing the wound on Jack's side. The stitches were taking well, but the process was painful, and Jack grunted in discomfort. Sweat shone on his brow. "You're healing faster than I expected," Alcott said, forcing a neutral tone, even as he tensed at being so close to a man reputed for cold-blooded violence. "Years of outrunning bullets," Jack muttered, a grim note in his voice. "Builds up your tolerance." His gaze flickered to the small table where Alcott's medical bag rested. Beside it lay Jack's gun belt, which the doctor had removed upon discovering his patient was armed. "Let me have my Colt back," Jack said, nodding toward the holster. Alcott stiffened. "I'm not sure that's wise," he replied. "I've no intention of turning you in, but that doesn't mean I'll arm you in my own clinic." Jack's jaw clenched. "Doc, I appreciate that you saved my life. I truly do. But a man like me doesn't feel safe without his iron." A moment of charged silence followed. Alcott spoke slowly, measuring his words. "You are the only person in this town who's not safe, Jack. That gun might give you a sense of control, but it endangers everyone else. Besides, you can barely stand without tearing your stitches." Anger flashed in Jack's eyes, but it dulled with resignation as the pain throbbed in his side. "Fine," he said quietly, letting his head sink back on the pillow. "You've got your rules. Maybe I'm too weak to enforce mine. For now." Alcott finished dressing the wound, then stood. The moral burden weighed heavily on him. How many innocent travelers or homesteaders had fallen to that weapon? In his oath to heal, was he also enabling a killer to walk free again? The question coiled in his gut, stirring a sense of dread. Yet he reminded himself that he had done only what any decent doctor would do. He saved a life in peril. "Get some rest," Alcott said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your body's still recovering." Jack's eyes drifted closed, yet rest seemed far from him. Alcott stepped out, leaving the outlaw to his fitful sleep. In the small foyer of the clinic, Jeremiah waited, twisting his hat nervously in his hands. "Doc, how long can we keep this quiet?" he asked, voice trembling. "I keep thinking, if Red Jack's gang rides in, or if the Pinkertons or a bounty hunter shows up." Alcott closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing the tension in his temples. "I don't have an answer," he admitted. "We can't hide this forever. But I won't deliver a wounded man to a hangman's rope." "But what if he kills again?" Jeremiah pressed his conscience, warring with the doctors. "People say he's taken more lives than we can count." Alcott's hand paused mid-rub. A cold, heavy weight settled in his chest. He recalled the Hippocratic Oath, or what it meant out here in the lawless West. First, do no harm. Yet the consequences of preserving Red Jack's life could be catastrophic. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Alcott tried to steady himself. "I can't answer for his past, but right now he's my patient, and I won't break that trust." Jeremiah sighed, adjusting his hat. "Understood, Doc. I'll keep quiet as long as I can. Just watch your back." Alcott nodded, and Jeremiah slipped out, leaving the doctor alone with his thoughts. He glanced down the narrow hallway, the door to Jack's room closed. Outside, the sun sank low, painting the sky in reds and oranges, the same color that had stained the outlaw's shirt. Indeed, an oath and a gun were locked in fragile balance. How much longer could this precarious arrangement last? As the days rolled by, Red Jack Mackenzie gradually regained strength. To Alcott's cautious relief, the outlaw did not attempt to lunge for his colt or escape. He could barely walk more than a few steps without clutching his side. Still, the time spent confined to the clinic left Jack irritable. His mood swinging from terse cooperation to icy silence. Alcott, for his part, steeled himself with each new dawn, unsure if this would be the day everything unraveled. Then one brisk morning it did, or nearly so. Alcott was in the midst of checking Jack's bandages when heavy knocks resonated on the clinic's front door. The thudding startled them both. Alcott froze, glancing at Jack, whose face had paled. Without a word, the doctor motioned for him to stay quiet and slipped into the foyer. He cracked the door open to find a lone figure on the porch, a gruff man in dusty riding clothes, a gun on his hip. He lifted his hat in a gesture that seemed polite, but carried an undercurrent of tension. "Mornin', Doc. Name's Hank Stillman," the man introduced himself. "I'm riding through the territory, heard this is where folks come when they're in a bad way. Mind if I come in?" Alcott noticed the man carried his left arm in a makeshift sling. Blood had seeped through the bandage. A wave of dread prickled over the doctor. This stranger might be anyone, a drifting rancher, a bounty hunter, or maybe one of Red Jack's men. It was impossible to know. But Alcott's medical instincts won out. "Of course," he said curtly, stepping aside. Stillman ducked in and surveyed the small clinic with a suspicious squint. "Sure is quiet in here." "You got any other patients?" Alcott kept his face neutral. "Not at the moment. Let's see that arm." As he set to work examining the wound, Alcott realized the bullet graze was fairly recent. Stillman winced when the doctor pressed around the wound. Got on the wrong end of a card game up in Abilene, Stillman muttered, as if by way of explanation. Cheetah tried to shoot me. Didn't expect me to move so fast. I can clean and stitch it up, Alcott said. Should only need a few stitches. You'll need to keep it rested. Stillman nodded. I hear you're a good doc. Some local folks said if anyone could patch me up, it'd be James Alcott. That's your name, right? Alcott's throat tightened. He forced a thin smile. That's right. Small town, so word travels. The entire time he worked, he remained hyper-aware of the corridor behind him, leading to Jack's room, praying the outlaw remained silent and out of sight. Stillman occasionally let his gaze wander around the clinic, as though searching for something. Once he almost rose to investigate a noise from the back. Alcott managed to distract him with instructions and more laudanum for the pain. Sweat beaded on Alcott's temples as he stitched the wound. Each second felt like the stretch of an eternity. Where you headed? Alcott asked, trying to sound casual. Stillman shifted. South, maybe. Might try my luck at ranching in Arizona. Heard the pay's decent. He paused, glancing at Alcott. Can't say I appreciate all these outlaws roaming around. Folks say that bastard Red Jack Mackenzie is in the region too. Alcott kept sewing heart pounding. I've heard those rumors, yes. Stillman's eyes narrowed. You sure you haven't seen no suspicious characters? Man's got a bounty worth a king's ransom. Could make a doc's life real comfortable. Alcott's chest tightened again. He forced a shrug. If I had, I suspect I wouldn't be left alive to tell about it from what I hear. Stillman chuckled grimly. Fair enough. He winced as Alcott tied off the final stitch. You know the Pinkertons are poking around these territories asking questions. Word is Mackenzie's gang might even try to spring him from a jam somewhere. If you ever catch wind of him, best keep your head down or send a wire to the authorities. Alcott nodded as he bandaged Stillman's arm. Advice taken. That's 6 stitches. Try to keep it clean and rest at least a couple of days. Stillman rose, rotating his arm gingerly. I'll do that, Doc. Thanks. He fished out a few coins, more than enough to cover the fee. Keep the change. Pausing at the door, he turned back, his gaze lingering. You're sure you ain't got any other patients here? Alcott met his eyes steadily. If I did, they wouldn't be in any shape for visitors. Stillman let out a low chuckle. Right. Well, safe travels in this Wild West, Doc. With that, he left. As soon as Alcott bolted the door, his breath whooshed out of him. He hurried down the corridor to find Jack half sitting on the bed, his side wrapped in fresh bandages. Their eyes locked. I heard Jack said tersely. He was sniffing around for me. Probably not the last. Alcott nodded, uncertain what to say. His mind churned with the realization that word of Red Jack Mackenzie's presence in the territory was spreading. Anyone could be an ally or an enemy. The knock on the door had rattled the fragile sanctuary they'd maintained. As the dust settled from Stillman's departure, Alcott and Jack exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. The lullaby of safety was over, replaced by the ticking clock of impending confrontation. How long before a more determined bounty hunter or a full Pinkerton detail arrived at Ironwood Gulch's doorstep? And where would that leave Dr. James Alcott? His healing oath caught in the crossfire of justice and outlaw vengeance, with Hank. Stillman's unsettling visit echoing in his mind. Dr. Alcott faced another complication. The clinic was usually open to all. But now he found himself turning away any non-emergency cases citing limited capacity. Whispers circulated that the doctor was either ill or embroiled in some secret business. The curious eyed the drawn curtains and wondered if Alcott was harboring something or someone behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Jack's healing accelerated. Each day the color in his face returned, and his voice grew stronger. He was soon walking short distances with a limp. Observing the outlaw pacing restlessly in the back room, Alcott debated whether to confront the moral chasm between them. The tension was stifling the doctor, a man of peace, and the outlaw, a man of violence. One evening, while changing bandages, Alcott decided to broach the subject. "I've heard the stories," he said softly, trying not to sound accusatory. "Of the robberies, the shootouts, the bloodshed. You don't strike me as a mindless killer, but you must know your name instills fear." Jack's jaw clenched as he stared at the floor. "People see a wanted poster with a price on someone's head, and they conjure all sorts of demons," he replied. "I ain't saying I've never drawn a gun, never taken a life, but sometimes folks forget how things start." Alcott paused, waiting for him to continue. The moment stretched, and eventually Jack exhaled a weary sigh like a man unburdening a tomb of memories. "You want to hear a story of how Red Jack Mackenzie became an outlaw?" Alcott nodded carefully, setting aside the soiled bandages. "Only if you feel you need to tell it." Jack stared at his own hands, flexing his fingers, as though trying to summon a different life. "I was born in a little mining town in Colorado. Father drank himself to death. Mother was too poor to feed us. I took my first job at the mines when I was barely tall enough to swing a pick. Then came the company men, greedy as the day is long. We toiled for pennies, and my best friend died in a cave-in, while the owners raked in gold." His voice hardened. "After that, I wandered. Found myself in a card game where I got swindled. One thing led to another. Fists turned to guns. I shot a man. Maybe I was in the right, maybe not. But I ran. From that day on, I had to fight for every scrap to run from every deputy who heard my name. Once you spill blood in this West, it stains your soul. You become an outlaw, even if you never wanted to be." Alcott felt a pang of empathy. The frontier was merciless, crushing men beneath its wheels of hunger, greed, and violence. Still, pity did not erase wrongdoing. You had choices along the way. There are others who lose everything but don't turn to a life of crime. Jack nodded slowly, a haunted look in his eyes. "Yes, but once that first bullet was fired, the law didn't care about reasons or regrets. The only choice left was to survive or die. And I've survived, at the cost of everything that once resembled my soul." A silence settled. The night air crept through the cracks in the window frame, chilling the small room. Alcott pressed the fresh bandage to Jack's side, then asked, "What about your gang?" "Most came from similar scars," Jack said. "Broken men, looking for quick money or revenge. They respect me for not caring about the law that never cared about us. Sometimes we do things I'm not proud of, but out here, pride doesn't fill bellies." Alcott's mind whirred with conflicting thoughts. Compassion warred with condemnation. The West indeed was a crucible for broken souls. And now he asked quietly, "What happens when you're healed?" Jack's face darkened. "I ride off, I suppose, or try to. The Pinkertons are closing in, and I doubt you'll want me here. Can't blame you." The conversation ended with that, but it lingered in Alcott's heart. He returned to the front room, gazing at the flickering lantern light. Shadows of the past. Yes, Jack's entire life was one long shadow cast by tragedy and violence. The doctor felt a tug of sorrow for the boy who was forced to grow up in a ruthless world. But pity didn't change the blood on Jack's hands, or the danger he presented to Ironwood Gulch. Alcott found himself at a moral crossroads, praying for wisdom in a land that offered none. Could a man like Jack be redeemed, or was his path forever paved in gun smoke and regret? The hush of the clinic provided no answers. Only a silent stage for the next chapter in a twisted drama where fate itself held a loaded deck. By now, rumors of a wounded man in Doctont, Alcott's clinic, began to gain traction. Ironwood Gulch was too small for secrets to remain buried long. Whispers skittered through the saloon, trickled past the general store, and threaded around the blacksmith's forge. A few folks speculated the patient was a relative of Alcott's. Others suspected it was a rancher from a distant spread. But more than a few quietly wondered if it might be a wanted man, given the way Alcott had turned away visitors. Adding fuel to the speculation, a rash of cattle-rustling incidents took place on the outskirts of town. Ranchers fumed over missing livestock, and some claimed to have seen a small group of riders slinking past in the dead of night. Talk of an outlaw band in the vicinity set everyone on edge. Fear mingled with frustration, and the newly arrived sheriff's deputy, Hank Bartlett, tried to calm nerves by promising an investigation. One day, while Alcott was washing linens in a basin behind the clinic, he heard hurried footsteps. Peering around the corner, he saw Deputy Bartlett striding toward him, hat askew, dust swirling around his boots. "Mornin', Doc," the deputy said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I heard you got yourself a patient in pretty bad shape." Rancher or drifter? Alcott forced a polite smile. "He's not from around here. Got a bullet wound a few days back. He's recovering but not ready to receive visitors." Bartlett nodded, pursing his lips thoughtfully. "Folks have been talking, you know. With all the rustling and the stories of outlaws, some are worried there might be trouble brewing." Alcott's heart pounded, but he kept his composure. "I understand. But my clinic's not a jailhouse, deputy. My patient hasn't caused any trouble." Bartlett gave him a long, assessing look. "I ain't accusing you, Doc. Just doing my job. If there's any sign he's involved in something unlawful, I'll have to question him." "Of course," Alcott said evenly. "But until he's well enough, I won't allow undue stress that could hamper his recovery." The deputy took off his hat, scratching at his short-cropped hair. "We're just on edge is all. Got a telegram that Pinkerton detectives might pass through soon, tracking some big bounties. You hear anything about that? Only rumors." Alcott deflected. "If they come, I'm sure they'll find their man, whoever that might be." Bartlett studied him for another heartbeat, then replaced his hat. "Well, keep me posted if your patient says anything suspicious. We can't let Ironwood Gulch be overrun by outlaws." With that, he turned and strolled off, greeting a few locals on the way. Alcott exhaled tension, knotting his shoulders. The net was drawing tighter. Inside the clinic, Jack likely overheard the conversation through the thin walls. It wouldn't be long before the Pinkertons or bounty hunters arrived, and with them the unstoppable tide of violence. As if on cue, Jeremiah approached from the alley, breathless. "Doc, we got a problem. A rancher named Lewis Caldwell says he saw men camped out near the creek last night. Armed men. Might be Jack's gang." Alcott felt a stab of alarm. "Any sign they're coming here?" Jeremiah wiped sweat from his brow. "Don't know. Caldwell said they looked like desperados." If they find out Jack's alive, they'll want him back, or they'll want revenge if they think we're holding him. A swirl of anxiety coursed through Alcott. The scenario he'd dreaded was materializing. Jack's gang might want to rescue or retrieve their leader, or they might blame Ironwood Gulch for trying to harbor him. Either way, the result could be bloodshed. Stepping inside the clinic, Alcott found Jack gingerly practicing slow steps across the floor. The outlaw's eyes flicked up. I heard. They might be my men, or maybe a rival band. There's a bounty on my head, so plenty of outlaws would like to claim it too. Alcott grimaced. This is spiraling out of control. The deputy's suspicious your gang or some other outlaws are lurking nearby, and the Pinkertons might be on their way. We're on the edge of a storm, Jack. A flicker of something like regret crossed the outlaw's features. I never wanted to bring trouble to this town. You patched me up more kindness than I deserved. Might be best if I ride out now while I still can. Alcott shook his head. You're still not fully recovered. It's too dangerous for you to travel. And what if leaving the clinic draws attention and starts a firefight? I can't have innocent people caught in the crossfire. Jack clenched his fists. Innocent people get caught in crossfires all the time out here, Doc. A bleak silence followed, broken only by the ticking of Alcott's pocket watch. Their standoff embodied the harsh contradiction of the frontier survival at any cost, weighed against moral duty. If Jack tried to leave, he might die on the trail, or he might lead killers into Ironwood Gulch. If he stayed, he might draw the law or vengeance to the very doorstep of the man who saved him. The day wore on with no immediate resolution, only the suffocating sense that a fuse had been lit, and it was burning toward a powder keg of unstoppable fate. A crimson sunset stretched across the sky, casting jagged shadows over Ironwood Gulch. Dr. Walcott hovered in the clinic's front room, anxiety gnawing at him. Jeremiah had just rushed in, breathless with news that riders, likely 5 or 6, were spotted heading toward town from the south. Armed, faced with the possibility of a raid, the deputy scrambled to position a few hastily deputized ranchers along the main road. Inside the clinic, Red Jack Mackenzie paced, wincing occasionally as his healing side flared with pain. Alcott was uncertain if Jack planned to flee or fight. A coiled tension hung in the air, thick as desert dust. Then through the small window, they watched shapes appear on the horizon, silhouetted against the dying light. Moments later, the thunder of hooves resonated in the street. Shouts echoed down the row of buildings. Alcott stood at the window, heart pounding, as he saw 6 figures dismount. Their ringleader, a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw, barked orders. At his side, a wiry man with a rifle cradled in his arms scanned the buildings. Jack squinted through the window. "That's Finch," he muttered. "Used to run with me until we parted ways. Word is he started his own gang. They're no friends of mine." Alcott's stomach sank. "Are they after you?" "They're after the bounty on my head," Jack said. "Or maybe they think I have something they want." Gunfire exploded in the distance. Deputy Bartlett and his ragtag group of ranchers had opened warning shots. Townsfolk scattered, ducking into buildings or diving behind water troughs. The tension erupted into chaos. Alcott heard Finch bellow, "We ain't here for your pitiful cowhands. We know Mackenzie's in this town, and we want him." Another volley of shots rang out. One of Finch's men took a bullet in the shoulder and spun to the ground. The rest dashed for cover behind the hitching posts and wagons. A standoff ensued, sporadic gunfire, shouts, the thunder of boots on wooden porches. Inside the clinic, Alcott's hands trembled. He was no gunslinger, just a doctor with a vow to do no harm. Suddenly the door slammed open. Jeremiah stumbled in, panting. "Doc, it's bad out there. The deputy can't hold them off forever. They're threatening to burn the town if we don't hand over Red Jack." Alcott spun to Jack, whose face was steeled with determination. "If I walk out there, they'll try to kill me." "Probably kill me slow," Jack said, with grim finality. "But if I stay, the whole town suffers." Jeremiah looked between the outlaw and the doctor. "If we let 'em have you, they'll probably just kill you and still loot the town." Alcott's throat tightened. All that time harboring Jack, trying to save a life, and now it seemed that life was going to cost the entire community. Another round of gunfire jolted them bullets, pinging off the metal brackets outside. Jeremiah ducked behind the counter. Jack moved stiffly toward the table where Alcott had placed his Colt. The doctor tensed. "What are you doing?" Jack's voice was low. "There's no outrunning this, Doc. I may not be at full strength, but I can still shoot. You saved my life. Let me see if there's a spark of redemption left in me." Before Alcott could protest, Jack snatched the gun and checked its chamber. Then, with a determined glare, he opened the door and limped into the swirling chaos. Alcott gasped and followed, refusing to let the wounded man face certain death alone. Jeremiah, nerves frayed, trailed behind. Outside, the twilight gloom was punctuated by muzzle flashes. Jack raised a hand, stepping into the open. "Finch," he shouted, voice echoing off the wooden facades. "You're looking for me?" "Well, here I am." Finch stepped out from behind a water trough, rifle trained on Jack. "Red Jack Mackenzie," he sneered, eyes ablaze with greed. "They said you were dead. Shame you're still breathing. Means I can collect a fat bounty." "You want me?" Jack roared back. "Then leave these people alone. They got nothing to do with our business." Finch laughed, hollow and cruel. "Your death's worth good money, and maybe some looting on the side. Town's got supplies we need. Now be a good boy and drop your gun." Alcott tensed beside Jack, determined to speak. "He's injured. Let the doctor get him safely out of town, and you can shut it." "Sawbones," Finch snarled, jerking his rifle upward. "I don't negotiate with do-gooders." Jack turned to Alcott, swallowing hard. Then in a blur of motion he pivoted and fired. His bullet grazed Finch's shoulder, sending the scarred man stumbling. The tension snapped like a twisted wire. Gunfire erupted on both sides. Finch's men scattered returning fire with rifles and revolvers. The deputy and ranchers joined the fray shots, cracking through the dusty air. Alcott dove behind a barrel, his heart in his throat, as bullets whizzed overhead. And in that whirlwind of chaos, the fate of the infamous outlaw and the town that inadvertently shielded him would be decided by lead and iron. Jack still half lame, but fueled by a desperate need to protect Alcott. And Ironwood, Gulch advanced on Finch, each step a gamble against the bullet that might end his life. Gunfire tore through Ironwood Gulch as chaos reigned in the streets. Jack fought with gritted teeth, ignoring the searing pain in his side. Dr. Alcott ducked behind a post, heart pounding as bullets zipped past. He had feared this kind of violence would one day reach his clinic, but never imagined it would come like this. Jack took down one of Finch's men and forced the others back with precise shots. Deputy Bartlett, bolstered by Jack's fierce resistance, pressed the offensive. The balance of power shifted, but Finch remained a snarling, bloodied wolf behind cover. Jack Finch shouted, "You've got no way out!" Jack fired again, forcing Finch to duck. Alcott rushed to Jack's side. "You're bleeding through your bandage." "Let it bleed," Jack rasped. I ain't finished." From across the street, Finch's rifleman took aim. Jack spun and fired one clean shot, dropped the man. The brutality sickened Alcott, yet he saw that hesitating meant death. Then the tide turned. Finch's men fled, abandoning their leader. But Finch stood firm, wild-eyed and furious. He aimed straight at Jack's chest. Alcott didn't think he moved. A shot cracked and pain exploded in his shoulder. He collapsed, gasping. Doc Jack roared. Fueled by rage, Jack fired. His bullet struck Finch dead center, ending the threat in a single thundering shot. Silence settled, broken only by the echo of violence and the rise of dust. Jack rushed to Alcott, hands trembling as he pressed against the bleeding wound. "Stay with me," he pleaded. Deputy Bartlett and Jeremiah hurried over. Together they helped lift Alcott and carry him into the clinic. Jack, ignoring his own injury, did what the doctor had done for him. He cleaned the wound, instructed Jeremiah, and stitched with shaking hands. "Boil the needle," Alcott muttered, barely conscious. They worked in feverish silence. Minutes crawled by as blood pooled and breath faltered. But eventually, the bullet came out. Alcott's color returned, and his breathing steadied. Jack exhaled with relief, then slumped into a chair, pale and drenched in sweat. "You need rest, too," Alcott rasped. Jack smiled faintly. "Not yet. I still owe you." Outside, the townspeople began to regroup. Finch's body was dragged away, and the threat of destruction faded. But inside the clinic, something deeper had changed. The line between outlaw and healer had blurred. Jack had risked everything, not for money, not for revenge, but for a man who'd shown him mercy. And in doing so, he'd earned something rare in the lawless West. A second chance. Morning sunlight crept through the clinic windows, falling across bullet-scarred walls and shattered glass. Ironwood Gulch stirred cautiously. The threat of Finch was gone, but the memory of gunfire lingered. Still, gratitude filled the air. Gratitude for the unlikely outlaw who'd fought beside them. Inside the clinic, Alcott dusted on a cot, shoulder tightly bandaged. Nearby, Jack sat slouched in a chair, still weak but upright, his face shadowed with exhaustion. Deputy Bartlett stepped in, glancing between the two men who had rewritten the town's fate. "How's the doc?" Bartlett asked softly. Jack didn't look up. "He'll live. He's tougher than he looks." The deputy hesitated. In any other town, Red Jack Mackenzie would have been in chains or worse. But after last night, things weren't so clear. "What you did out there. It mattered," he said slowly. "Doesn't erase everything, but people saw it." Jack's mouth curled faintly. "I didn't do it for them. I did it for him." Bartlett nodded. "Still, Pinkertons might come soon. If you leave before they show, I won't stop you." Jack didn't answer, only looked toward the cot where Alcott stirred. Later that day, the doctor awoke to find Jack by his side. "Did we win?" he croaked. Jack smiled. "Finch is dead." His men ran. "You saved the town." "You saved me," Alcott murmured. "Didn't think we'd switch roles so fast." Their hands clasped, an unspoken bond, forged in gunfire. Over the next 2 days, Alcott slowly recovered. Jack, despite his injuries, helped Jeremiah tend to minor patients, keeping the clinic running. Townsfolk whispered of the outlaw who'd defended them, but no one came calling with torches or accusations. The town remained silent, grateful perhaps, or simply wary of interfering with fate. By the third morning, Jack gathered his few belongings, gun-watch vest, and approached Alcott's cot one last time. "You sure you won't stay?" Alcott asked, already knowing the answer. Jack shook his head. "Folks may smile now, but when the Pinkertons come, things change. I've got ghosts chasing me, Doc. Staying's not an option." Alcott nodded solemnly. "Then wherever you ride, try to be someone better." Jack placed his hat on his head and extended a hand. "Thank you for seeing a man where most see a monster." "Every life's worth saving," Alcott said, voice quiet. With that, Red Jack Mackenzie stepped into the rising sun and rode out of Ironwood Gulch, his silhouette shrinking against the endless plains. The Pinkertons arrived days later, but found no trace. The townspeople offered few answers, and no one dared betray the man who'd defended them. Alcott healed slowly, the scar a constant reminder of that violent night. Sometimes he'd stare into the dusk and wonder where Jack had gone, whether the outlaw found peace or simply disappeared into legend. In the end, one doctor's compassion had rewritten a life and maybe, just maybe, salvaged a soul from the grip of the West's cruel fate. In the end, the dusty streets of Ironwood Gulch bore witness to an extraordinary twist of fate, a notorious outlaw saved by the humble doctor who believed in healing over vengeance. Their unlikely bond challenged the boundaries of law, morality, and redemption in a land where bullets often spoke louder than words. Though Red Jack Mackenzie vanished into the desert horizon, his debt to Dr. James Alcott was repaid in kind. And for Alcott, the scar on his shoulder became a lifelong reminder that compassion can spark hope even in the darkest hearts. Thank you for joining me on this thrilling journey through the wild frontier. If you enjoyed the twists, the tension, and the battle between mercy and justice, please give this video a like, share it with fellow Western fans, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. Your support helps keep these legendary tales alive, and there are many more adventures waiting just around the bend. Safe travels, partners.